Welcome back. Let's do part 2 of our notes. All right, so we've talked about how Rome started and how Rome was officially declared a republic, meaning they had no king and some people had the right to vote. They had no king because they had two consuls in charge, and the people who really had voting power were the patricians. So we discussed that with our first set of notes. Now we're going to talk about how Rome grows from being a republic to then having an empire of land and then creating an empire government by putting an emperor in power, which is comical because they swore they would never have a king, but they allowed themselves to have an emperor, which is putting one person in power. But before Rome becomes an empire government, we have to have empire of land. And that's what an empire is. It's where you own land outside of your original territory. Well, that happens. Here we go. When Rome gets involved in a series of wars, and they are called the Punic Wars, where Rome fights its number one enemy in the Mediterranean Sea, and that is the seafaring people, the Carthaginians from Carthage. And if you look on a map, the city of Carthage is right here. The red boot is where Rome is. That's the Italian boot right there. So Carthage is very close to them, and they tend to bump into each other a lot here in the Mediterranean Sea and are not friendly. They're enemies. And they get in a fight because both of them want to control that Dorito, that island of Sicily that hangs out in the Mediterranean. And the two fight in the First Punic War. Carthage loses, and Rome claims the island of Sicily. Obviously, Carthage is a sore loser, so they fight a second Punic War that Rome ends up winning again, and then they take the territory that you know today as Spain up here, this purple area right here. And then the Third Punic War, Carthage did not provoke it. Rome just went 50 years after the Second Punic War was over to the city of Carthage, spent 10 days burning and looting and destroying it, took everyone that lived in the city and sold them into slavery, and then renamed the territory Africa and called it a Roman province, which means made it Roman territory. So all of the purple that you see right here, they took and claimed. So everything that was purple, Rome gained in the Punic Wars. So all they were initially was just the boot, and they took everything that's purple. So they have a ton of land now, a ton of land, and that makes them an empire by definition, but they still had a republic form of government. Well, another problem starts to take face after the Punic Wars, and that is something that's going to really help change the republic to an empire. And it's a series of civil wars. All right, maybe you've heard of a guy named Julius Caesar. In an effort to help solve problems going on in Rome, the big problems were the poor of Rome didn't have land. There was a lot of what's the word I'm going for? Corruption. Corruption going on in the Roman government. And so there started to be some unrest. There started to be some revolts. In the republic they were fearing was going to fall apart. And remember, the Roman people loved their republic because it meant they did not have a king. So in order to save the republic, the first idea came up that they were going to put into power three men with equal power. And if we were together, we would do this cheer. We go, equal power between three, triumvirate. And it's a term called a triumvirate. And the idea was they were going to put three powerful men in charge to save the republic. So that was the goal of the triumvirates, was to save that republic government. Well, all the triumvirates end up doing is wrecking the republic. Because if you put three men in power that are supposed to have equal power, it's never going to last that way. And the first triumvirate ended up with just two men because one of them died. And of the two men, they end up fighting each other to get to be the sole ruler of Rome. And you probably know who won because there's one of these names that I bet that you recognize and the other one that you don't. And the one that you recognize is Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar ends up taking over Rome, declaring himself dictator, and keeping the republic alive, even though he is a dictator. Okay, so the big terms you got to know here, like for our notes that we're filling in, is remember Julius Caesar was in that first triumvirate, but he declares himself dictator to save the republic. Okay, so he's the only person in charge. Now, the other thing that we are going to talk about for Julius Caesar is how he dies. Maybe you know. Julius Caesar famously was killed on March 15th in 44 BCE. It's always known as March 15th because it's the Ides of March, and the Ides of any month is the middle, the 15th. All of his buddies planned a meeting of the Senate, and Caesar went to that meeting, and they all pulled daggers out from underneath their togas and stabbed him like 20 something times, and he died, bled out on the Senate floor, and was dead. And then you know, probably have heard the thing that Shakespeare wrote, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. We've come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. That was given by Mark Antony after Caesar's death. When this fell apart, when the first triumvirate fell apart, Caesar was put in as dictator. Caesar attempted to save the republic. He was killed because he was a dictator, and he was the only ruler in charge. This gives way to the second triumvirate, which was an attempt again to save the republic, where we put 3 men in charge. Of these 3, the guy that survives and ends up being the sole ruler is a guy named Augustus, or he was named Octavian. And then when he becomes the ruler of Rome, he changes his name to Augustus, which is why the 8th month of the year is August. Fun fact for you there. And he ushers in what is going to be the Roman Empire, because he declares himself not dictator, but emperor. He declares himself emperor. So on our notes, you need to say that he declares himself emperor, and Rome officially becomes an empire. All right. Augustus does a lot of things once he is the first emperor in 27 BCE. He keeps a huge army. That's one of the ways that he keeps himself in power. He keeps a very large army. He tried to invade and conquer Germany above Italy because the Germans were now the #1 enemy of Rome. He lost 3 legions, which is 15,000 men trying to do that. Didn't work out well for him, and that proved that the power of Rome was not unlimited at all. He still tried to keep a republic form of government with having a Senate, so he kept the Senate going. Now, Augustus is our first emperor. There are a series of good emperors and series of bad emperors. Here's some good emperors. And when we had good emperors in power, Rome was at peace. We call that term the Pax Romana. It's a time period where Rome wasn't involved in any major wars. And in that Pax Romana time period, here's some images of the culture of Greece. They had glass, ladies, what your hairdo would have looked like, money, what it would have looked like, etc. Now, the good emperors treated the people well. They focused on education and public works, but it still is a time period that the Senate, which is supposed to be the representative body of the Roman people, is losing power, and the emperors are gaining power. Farming is the #1 job in Rome. After that, it's trading, being a merchant. Many people worked in the cities and shops and markets, and then there were thousands of unemployed people. Historians that look back say really one of the downfalls of why they think Rome fell was because Rome did not take care of their poor. And they had a lot of poor people because their economy did not include everyone. And they just kind of let that become a huge issue, that there were too many unemployed people. All right, so Rome is an empire. Initially, remember, it took over the area from Carthage. Now it's really going and taking over everywhere. The full extent of the Roman Empire is everything that you see in purple. There was a little nickname, this is the Mediterranean Sea. There was a nickname that the Mediterranean Sea was called a Roman lake because Rome literally conquered all of the land touching the Mediterranean Sea. This is the other problem that's going to make Rome fall. It literally just got too big. You can't control an area this large with one military, even though the military was obviously broken up into units and spread out, but it was spread too thin, and Rome was getting too big for its britches, and it's going to fall. Some questions you have to answer that we're going to look at for Roman culture, so you know some things about it. The famous building of the Colosseum. The Colosseum obviously is where gladiator fights took place. You also see in the Colosseum Rome's favorite architectural feature, which is the arch. But this is the Colosseum today. These are pictures that I took when I got to go in college and be a tourist in Rome. And it was so interesting to me is it's right beside a major road in Rome. It's just like, oh, yep, driving down the road. Oh, there's the Colosseum, something that was built literally 2,000 years ago. But weathering and all the invasions at the end of the Roman Empire really kind of tore apart this Colosseum. This is what the inside looks like. Part of the stage has been rebuilt. So this stage would have come out and covered all of these hallways that were underneath the stage. And that is where the gladiators stayed, as well as like the trapdoors that they kept the wild animals that you know that they used. And all of the seats up here that would have been here, they've all weathered away. So you can't really see where people would have sat. That's all come away because it's been open to the elements. There's another beautiful arch for you. And more pictures of what the Colosseum looks like. There's once again, they love the arches. They love the arches. They built arches to celebrate everything. The Roman Forum is the Roman marketplace. This is where they did all of their business. So Forum is the marketplace. Okay, there's the arch. There's the Colosseum off in the distance. And then you see some columns, things they copied from the Greeks. Once again, big arch. Look how small I am compared to the massive arches that they built. Columns they copied from Greeks. Okay. The Roman family, just so you are aware of some big things here, it was a patriarchal society, which meant men were in charge, children were raised at home, you were educated by your father, or you were sent to school, or you were lucky enough you had a Greek slave that was your tutor. Roman boys, you were trained to be soldiers, and you were trained to be politicians. Girls, you were trained to be a wife. You had arranged marriages somewhere between the age of 12 and 14. You were married off to a boy that was 16 or older, and your job was to start making babies. After 100 AD, women start to gain some political influence in the home, which is fabulous, and women are gaining more freedom outside of the home. Slaves, the Roman Empire was infamous for slaves. If you were taken a slave by the Roman Empire, it didn't necessarily mean you were going to be a slave for the rest of your life. But the Roman Empire depended on slave labor, and the slaves normally were not treated well. The most famous slave revolt was led by a slave named Spartacus, who was forced to be a gladiator, and he escapes and actually uses a lot of his gladiator buddies and then escape slaves, and they defeat the Roman Empire's army like multiple times until finally they're trapped. And they crucify 6,000 of those slaves in that slave revolt to send a message to never rise up against the Roman Empire again. Please know that the city of Rome was quite the big city. It is where you went for all of the action. There was Colosseum fights, gladiator fights, chariot races, dramatic performances, this horse racing track where you had the chariot racing. And then the last question that you are answering is what was built that was very, very similar to Greek architecture, and that is the Pantheon. They didn't even come up with a better name. Parthenon was the Greek one. Pantheon is this. So the Pantheon, once again, you got columns directly relating it to the Parthenon. And then the Romans added a dome on this one, which is a 360 arch, since they were good at that. Just some other images for you. There's the Roman roadways that are still there today. They did have aqueducts, which brought in fresh water, and you can see the arches there. And then our next lesson, we'll talk about the rise of Christianity. Okay? Thanks, guys. Good job.